A single glove, dropped at Grand Central, and a mystery that no one saw coming. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Where are you tuning in from today? I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this one. When a woman drops a glove at Grand Central, most men chalk it up to gravity, fate, or maybe flirtation if they're feeling ambitious. Me, I pocketed it and walked 3 steps too far before realizing I had picked up something heavier than leather. Not heavier in ounces. This thing weighed nothing. But something about the glove made my fingers itch, like it had secrets sewn into the seams. It was tan kidskin, butter soft and recently worn, with the faintest whiff of orange blossom and elevator oil. Don't ask how I knew that last one. Spend enough years dodging trouble through Manhattan office buildings. You develop a nose for cologne and machinery. It was Tuesday morning, and I was doing something I never do. Returning from an errand Wolfe didn't send me on. The truth is, I'd taken a client to lunch. Not Wolfe's client, mine. A redhead from the Bronx who needed a missing husband found, fast, cheap, and quiet. None of which was in Wolfe's wheelhouse. But she'd been crying in the waiting room 3 days earlier, and I have a soft spot for tears that don't smear mascara. So there I was at Grand Central, halfway up the marble steps from track 28, when the glove fluttered past me like a leaf on the breeze. Its owner didn't notice, just kept walking, tall and straight-backed, with the kind of posture you only get from ballet or rigid Catholic schooling. She wore navy blue, the sort of coat that cost more than a week's rent. Brown hair twisted under a close hat, and she was missing her left glove. I called out, "Miss," not because I thought she'd hear me, but because I'm a gentleman. Then I tucked the glove into my pocket and followed her. Only problem was, she disappeared. I don't mean slipped into a cab or rounded a corner. I mean vanished. Mid-hallway, in the middle of Grand Central, with security guards, commuters, and an old man hawking newspapers not 20 feet away. 1 second she was 3 strides ahead, the next, gone. I stood still for a beat, glove in hand. Then I muttered something short and ungentlemanly and went looking for her. 15 minutes later, I gave up. I'd checked the washrooms, the oyster bar, the taxi stand, and the women's lounge, though the last one nearly got me slapped. No blue coat, no straight spine, no whiff of elevator oil. By the time I climbed into a cab, the glove felt like evidence. Of what, I had no idea. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I got back to the brownstone. I heard the humidity sigh at me as I passed the orchids and made a beeline for the office, where Fritz had left a pot of coffee hot enough to forgive anything short of murder. I had just poured myself a cup when the front doorbell rang. I opened it to a woman in navy blue. Not the same one. This one was older, shorter, her coat cheaper, her posture less proud, but she held a pair of gloves in her hand, both tan, and she looked at me like she'd bitten a lemon. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Now." "Let's not start off with demands," I told her. "Who are you, and what glove brought you here?" That got me a flicker of surprise, then suspicion. "My name is Lillian Foregrave," she said, "and I think my daughter is in danger." I stepped aside, already hearing Wolfe's voice in my head saying no, before he even knew the question. "Come in," I said anyway. "And don't take it personally if the answer turns out to be not interested. He's got a schedule carved in granite and a distaste for disruption." She stepped into the front hall like she was bracing for a wave. "This won't be a disruption. It'll be a rescue." I led her into the office. Wolfe wasn't there yet, which gave me 2 minutes to get the highlights. Her daughter's name was Elsbeth Foregrave. 27, employed at a law firm downtown, missing since yesterday. Lillian had last seen her in Grand Central at 9:05 a.m. She had been wearing a navy coat and tan gloves. "Your daughter," I said, fishing the glove out of my pocket, "wouldn't happen to have dropped this?" Lillian gasped, then nodded. hand trembling. "I saw her. She dropped it, then vanished." At that moment, Wolfe entered the room. He stopped 2 steps inside, eyebrows arching above his nose like question marks with judgment issues. "Archie, what is this?" I opened my mouth, but Lillian beat me to it. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, rising, "I'm Lillian Forgrave. My daughter may be missing, or worse, and your assistant has already found her glove. That makes you my best hope." Wolfe regarded her, then the glove, then me. "I dislike coincidences," he said flatly. "I thought you disliked clients more." "I do, but I dislike mysteries that arrive in my house even more." He exhaled through his nose. "Sit, madam. Speak clearly. Mr. Goodwin, prepare to take notes. This glove has begun to itch." So that's how it started. With one glove, one woman, and one of Wolfe's least favorite things, something strange slipping past his front door without an invitation. Wolfe settled into the red leather chair with the grace of a man preparing to endure minor surgery. Annoyed, but resolute. He pinched the bridge of his nose once, then folded his hands on his considerable midsection and gave Lillian Forgrave the full blast of his disapproval. She didn't blink. "Tell me," he said, without embellishment, "what prompted you to believe your daughter is missing?" "I haven't heard from her in 36 hours, she replied. "That's not like Elsbeth. She calls me every evening, always." "Perhaps she's busy." "She's never too busy for me, especially not after yesterday." That last bit had an undertone. One Wolfe caught immediately. His nostrils flared. "Yesterday? We had an argument in Grand Central just before her train. She said something she never would have said in public, let alone to me." "What was it?" Lillian hesitated. Then, "She said she was afraid. That someone had followed her the night before. That she thought—" Her voice faltered. "She thought someone had been inside her apartment. But nothing was taken. No forced entry. Just things moved. The mirror tilted. The books rearranged." "And your response?" "I told her she was overworked and imagining things." Wolfe sighed slowly. "Madam, forgive me, but the moment a woman says she believes her home has been breached, that response is as foolish as it is common." She flushed, but didn't argue. Wolfe glanced at me. "And you claim to have seen her shortly after this argument?" "Correct. She was walking fast. Dropped her glove. Didn't look back." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "Describe her." I did. Coat, hat, posture, hair, the whole package. Lillian's hand trembled as she listened, confirming every detail with silent nods. Her eyes had gone misty now, but not with tears, with fear. "I tried to follow her," I said, "but she vanished. It was like someone swallowed her whole." "Humph." Wolfe leaned back slightly, then shut his eyes, thinking. Fritz chose that moment to peek his head in, silently seeking permission to deliver lunch. Wolfe shook him off with a grunt, which meant we were officially in deep. Nothing got between Wolfe and his meals except orchids or murder, and even then, the murder had to be promising. "She lives alone?" Wolfe asked. "Yes. A walk up on East 39th. 3rd floor. Small but tidy. She's meticulous." I jotted that down. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. "And you filed no missing persons report?" "I tried. They said it hadn't been long enough." "And you told them about the glove?" She shook her head. "I didn't think it mattered." "It matters," Wolfe said dryly. "Everything matters." He looked at me again. "Archie, arrange an interview with the building superintendent. Speak to neighbors. Examine her apartment without damaging its state. No fingerprints." I nodded. "And if I find signs someone's been inside?" "You won't, but you'll find signs they meant to be noticed." Wolfe turned back to Mrs. Forgrave. "Was she seeing anyone? A romantic entanglement?" Lillian hesitated, then offered a tight-lipped nod. His name is Preston Glanville, senior associate at her firm. Very polished, the kind of man who looks you in the eye without showing you what's behind it. That's poetic, I said. Useful, too. She said he was attentive, generous. But last week she told me she thought he was hiding something. She wouldn't say what, just that she'd seen a side of him that frightened her. Wolfe shifted, in his chair, not liking the sound of that. Do you have his address? I have his card. In my bag. I fetched it for her and took it. West 75th, near the park. Upper floor co-op. Fancy. The kind of place where rent didn't come with hot water problems or squeaky radiators. I slipped it into my notebook and stood. I'll start with the apartment, then him. Good. Take the glove. I glanced at Wolfe, surprised. He was never sentimental about objects, but he nodded toward it with a frown. If it is Elsbeth's, someone may recognize it. I pocketed the glove again. You expect me to carry this thing around like Cinderella's valet? Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. If the slipper fits. I grabbed my coat and Lillian rose. Will you find her? She asked me, voice barely above a whisper. I looked at Wolfe, who had closed his eyes again, already swimming upstream through deductions I wouldn't see for hours. Then I turned back to her. We'll find out who wanted her lost. That's the first step. Elsbeth Foregrave's apartment was the kind of place that made you feel guilty for leaving your socks on the floor. Sparse, clean, with a touch of Art Deco and a lot of vertical organization. No signs of struggle, nothing overturned. But Wolfe had called it. Something was off. The books on the shelf had gaps, as if one had been removed recently, then replaced in the wrong spot. The mirror in the hallway reflected the wrong sliver of room, tilted by a few inches. A framed photo of Elsbeth and a man, presumably Preston Glanville, sat on the mantel. He was good-looking in a vacuum-sealed way, corporate charm, no edges. Her smile looked tight. I gave the place a slow, methodical once-over. The closet revealed a blue coat, tan gloves, both present, which made mine a spare, or something else. I photographed the apartment with Wolfe's camera. He insisted on using film, of course. Said it was harder to tamper with and less inclined to intelligent meddling. I didn't argue. I never do when it comes to his preferences in relics. Downstairs, I caught the super, a thin man with oil stains on his collar and a cigarette behind his ear. He remembered Elsbeth. Said she was quiet, sharp, never missed rent. Hadn't seen her since Monday morning. Didn't recall anyone strange around, but admitted he mostly kept his nose in his crossword. I showed him the glove. No reaction. Anyone else in the building she talked to? There's a guy on the second floor, art dealer or something. Kinda nosy. That was good enough for me. I thanked him and went to find the dealer. Mr. Langston was tall, spectacled, and allergic to boundaries. He invited me into his cluttered apartment the moment I said, Elsbeth. Oh yes, very composed girl, kept to herself. But I saw someone following her once. Man in a grey coat. He was waiting outside one night, just standing under the street lamp like something out of a dime novel. I nearly called the police. Why didn't you? She told me not to, said it was a misunderstanding, but I could tell she didn't believe it. I showed him the glove. He blinked. She carried those often, always had extras. Said she liked having a clean pair in every purse. Never without gloves, that one. So maybe this wasn't the glove dropped by accident. Maybe it was left. That thought rode with me all the way to Preston Glanville's apartment. The doorman didn't let me up right away. Called ahead. Said Mr. Glanville wasn't home. Claimed he was traveling for work. I left my card and thanked him anyway. He watched me go with a look I didn't like. Too controlled. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was dark and Wolfe was midway through dinner. You left your roast duck to get cold. I asked. I find my appetite dulled by insipid interruptions, he said. What have you? Elsbeth had 2 gloves. This one wasn't lost. It was planted. He looked up sharply. And her boyfriend's out of town, or pretending to be. Wolfe nodded once. Then the bait is working. He gestured to the glove. Let it stay in your pocket, Archie. But keep your hand on your wallet. We're being drawn into something particular. And from the look in his eye, I knew he wasn't talking about romance. Not this time. The next morning, I found myself staring at the glove again while pouring Wolfe's beer. It was still resting in my coat pocket like a silent clue trying to whisper louder than it should. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, not asleep, just practicing his impression of a stone lion with digestive superiority. He hadn't said much since dinner, which meant something was marinating in his brain far tastier than Fritz's duck. When I set the beer on the polished side table beside him, he opened one eye. Did you sleep well? Like a saint, I said. Only holier. He ignored that. You'll return to the law firm today. I blinked. Glanville's law firm. Indeed. Didn't exactly roll out the red carpet when I tried to find him. You weren't asking the right questions, nor at the correct temperature. I gave that the faintest smirk. And what temperature would you suggest? Curious but cordial. You are not accusing Mr. Glanville. You are inquiring after Miss Foregrave's absence. Make yourself someone they'd rather confide in than shut out. You mean lie to me nicely instead of lying flat? If they're lying, I want to know it. If they're hiding, I want you to help them feel seen. He picked up his beer, took a sip, and murmured without looking at me, "And you will take Saul Panzer." That caught me mid-sentence. Saul? He's already on retainer. I wish him to observe from the periphery. If Mr. Glanville is indeed absent, I want to confirm that with more than a doorman's telephonic word. I nodded. When Wolfe started deploying his lie detectors, things were already thicker than gravy. By 11, Saul and I were standing outside the steel and glass face of Cray, Vinton, and Glanville, an office building that looked like it hadn't cracked a smile since 1991. We had the right address, Suite 1240, and a secretary who looked as if she weighed every question on a scale of legality before answering. "Mr. Glanville is currently traveling," she said. "He's in Philadelphia for a litigation consult." I leaned on the counter just enough to annoy her without committing a misdemeanor. "Can you tell me when he left?" "I'm not sure. Perhaps yesterday morning. I'd have to check his calendar." "Please do." She didn't move. "I'm a private investigator," I added, "hired to locate Elsbeth Foregrave. She hasn't been seen in over 36 hours. Preston Glanville was her romantic partner, and she mentioned concerns to her mother prior to disappearing." That made the secretary blink. Not much else, but enough to register. "I'm not allowed to disclose personnel travel schedules to non-clients," she said. "But you just told me he's in Philadelphia. That's different." I nodded solemnly. "Right, that's vague." Saul, who had been pretending to admire the elevator call buttons, stepped forward. "My name is Saul Panzer. I'm also assisting. Would it help if I told you we're working in coordination with a legal party?" We are now," Saul muttered. She looked between us, then slowly turned to her desk and clicked through something on her monitor. Her fingers hovered, then tapped. "He left for Philadelphia on Tuesday morning," she said. "His return is scheduled for Thursday afternoon." That was tomorrow. "Did Elsbeth show up to work Monday?" "Yes," she said quickly now, "and left early. I think she said she wasn't feeling well." That tracked with Lillian's story about their argument at Grand Central. "Anyone see her after that?" "I wouldn't know. I don't track every associate." "Anyone close to her at the office?" The woman hesitated. "She was friendly with one of the paralegals. Merrill something. Merrill Dowse. Works in Doc Review back office." "Can I speak to her?" The secretary weighed it, then picked up the phone. I'll see if she's free. A few minutes later, Merrill Dowse emerged. She was a tall, freckled woman in a green sweater who looked like she kept granola in her desk and knew your birthday before you told her. I'm worried too, she said the moment we stepped into a quiet conference room. She never just vanishes. Tell me about her Monday. She seemed jumpy, like she was trying to act normal and couldn't quite pull it off. She told me she had a bad weekend. Said she thought someone had been inside her apartment. That matched something she said before? Number usually. She was chill, focused, very rational. Did she say who she thought might have broken in? Merrill bit her lip. She said something strange. She said, "It's not someone who wants me gone, it's someone who wants me changed." I asked what she meant, and she just shook her head and said, "I should have known better." Did she talk about Glanville? She used to, not recently. Why? She found something in his desk. What? I don't know. She never told me. She just said, "He's not who I thought." I scribbled that down. Saul watched her without blinking. You think he'd hurt her? I asked. I don't know, Merrill said. But she said he had two faces, one for charm, one for silence. Poetic, I said. Seems to be a theme. We thanked her and left. Back on the street, Saul said what I'd been thinking. Glanville didn't go to Philly. You're sure? I followed his mail 2 weeks ago. Private job. He uses the same doorman, same car service, and never leaves town without a 2-day dry cleaning pickup. That didn't happen. Then he's hiding. Looks that way. We split up. Saul went to verify Glanville's credit card trail. I went to the Waldorf Grand, where I suspected a man with two faces might be keeping one tucked behind a potted palm and room service receipts. It took a well-placed call and a cash tip to get a clerk to admit a Preston Glanville had checked in late Monday night, under a different name. Still hadn't checked out. I didn't knock on the door. Not yet. Instead, I called Wolfe from the lobby. He's here, I said. Registered under P. Gaines. Wolfe said. He's waiting for something. What? Not what. Whom? He paused. Return to the brownstone. Bring the glove. And ask Fritz to prepare the guest room. We are going to bait our fish properly. I hung up and slid the glove deeper into my pocket. Elsbeth Foregrave hadn't just vanished. She'd been placed somewhere safe or quiet, or maybe both. And whoever placed her there wanted us to stir the water just enough to make her visible again. Wolfe wasn't biting yet, but he was watching the line. Back at the brownstone, the air was thick with that particular flavor of anticipation Wolfe liked best. 1 part planning, 1 part precision, and a generous pour of smug certainty. He hadn't moved from his chair when I returned, but Fritz had already laid out the linen in the guest room, and the dining table had one too many places set for lunch. Wolfe didn't need confirmation that Glanville was hiding. He was preparing for someone else entirely. I tossed my coat onto the couch and pulled out the glove. Wolfe didn't even look at it. He's waiting for her, Wolfe said, eyes still closed. And she, in turn, is waiting for something else. Perhaps a signal. Perhaps a safety. Why the hotel, though? Why check, and under a pseudonym if he didn't leave town? Because visibility is a liability. Glanville wants her found, but not by anyone official. Not yet. So why not come to us? Because he fears what Wolfe might find if Wolfe starts turning over stones. I blinked at that. You're speaking in the third person again. That's a bad sign. He finally opened his eyes. Archie, did you note what Miss Dowse said? He has two faces. One for charm, one for silence. That is not the description of a guilty man. It is the description of a frightened one. Glanville's the scared one. Yes, not of us, of what she discovered. That gave me pause. I sat across from him and folded my arms. So, what's the play? He steepled his fingers. You will deliver the glove. To Glanville? Number to the front desk of the Waldorf Grand. Wrapped in tissue, placed in a small box. No return address. Have it delivered to his room with the message. She wore the other one when she walked away. Cryptic. Necessary. You think he'll come running? I think he'll come knocking. 2 hours later, after Fritz's roast pork and creamed spinach, we didn't have to wait long to find out. The doorbell rang just before 4. I opened it to a man who fit the photo from Elsbeth's mantle almost too perfectly. Tall, clean-cut, with dark eyes that scanned like security lasers and a jaw that looked like it had opinions. Mr. Wolfe, he said to me, mistaking me by a wide margin. No, I said, but he's expecting you. I led him into the office. Wolfe was in position, of course, upright in the chair, yellow silk robe hanging like ceremonial armor, eyes half-lidded with just enough interest to be menacing. Preston Glanville paused in the doorway like a man stepping into court. Sit, Wolfe said. Glanville sat. I stood behind him, leaning on the bookshelf like the world's most sarcastic gargoyle. Wolfe got right to it. You received the glove? Yes. And you recognized its significance? A pause. Then, yes. Good. Then we can dispense with preamble. You're not in Philadelphia. You have not been for weeks. You're hiding under a false name at the Waldorf. You are neither stupid nor innocent, but you are worried. That's fair, Glanville said softly. Wolfe studied him. You did not harm her. No. But you know where she is. Another pause. A breath. Then, yes. Wolfe's voice dropped a shade. Then why, Mr. Glanville, is her mother frightened to death and the police still unaware she's breathing? Because if I told anyone, he said, I'd be putting her back in danger. I straightened at that. Wolfe didn't blink. Explain. Glanville looked between us, weighing whether to lie. He didn't. She came to me on Sunday night, he said, terrified, shaking. She said someone had broken into her apartment twice. Not to steal anything, but to prove they could. They left notes, short ones, phrases, warnings. What kind of warnings? Glanville glanced at me. One said, you have 3 days to choose. Another said, if you say anything, it becomes permanent. Say anything about what? I asked. She never told me, he said. Only that she'd seen something she shouldn't have. A file, a name, something at the firm. She'd been working late Friday and pulled the wrong document off a printer in the managing partner's office. And she went pale. She said, they're watching me. I need to vanish. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. You helped her disappear. Yes. How? I rented a private cottage upstate, under her cousin's name. I drove her there myself Sunday night, left her with prepaid phones and cash. Wolfe leaned forward, the tiniest shift. Then why come here now? Because someone else knows I did it. And I got a message this morning, slipped under my door at the Waldorf. It said, she's not as hidden as you think. That got Wolfe's attention. And you believe the threat? Yes. Why? Because whoever left that note also left her necklace. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver chain with a small turquoise charm. She left this with me. No one else should have had it. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. The second glove was never meant for us, Archie. It was meant for him. Which means the person who tailed her to Grand Central was never bluffing. Indeed. I stepped forward. So who's the real player here, Glanville? Who's got eyes on your door in Elsbeth's cottage? He hesitated again. Wolfe cut in. Mr. Glanville, you have protected Miss Foregrave poorly, but not maliciously. If you continue to delay, however, you will cross a line from cowardice into complicity. Glanville's shoulders sagged. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a sheet of folded paper. He passed it to Wolfe. Wolfe read it in silence, then passed it to me. It was a page from a deposition log. 3 names circled, one of them underlined. Raymond Trebick, I read aloud. Wolfe closed his eyes. Of course. I stared at him. You know him? Unfortunately. A man who launders misfortune into profit. Real estate, legal loopholes, development schemes. Is he tied to the law firm? He was. They represented one of his holding companies for years. Elsbeth must have uncovered an off-books connection, one that suggests criminal laundering, possibly bribery. Enough to scare him? Enough to make her an inconvenient observer? Glanville spoke quietly. That name was on a document she was never supposed to see. The firm's cleaning it up, but not fast enough. I looked at Wolfe. You think they're hunting her? No, he said. Not yet. But they are tracking her, and now you. Glanville paled. Wolfe raised a finger. You will write a note to her. 5 words. She will recognize them. Which words? You're choosing, but nothing that sounds like panic. Then you will stay here under observation until this matter is closed. Glanville looked at me. You're not the police? No, I said. We're worse. We care. I left him in the guest room with paper and a pen. Wolfe had already dialed Saul before I returned to the office. Tell me, he said into the phone, what Raymond Trebick has been doing in the last 72 hours. Then find Elsbeth Foregrave's cottage. Quietly. He hung up and looked at me. The gloves were signals. The necklace was a threat. The file was the fuse. And the bomb? I asked. Still ticking, he said. But now we know the sound. He leaned back again and closed his eyes. We were no longer chasing a missing girl. We were baiting a man who didn't like being watched. The next morning began with Saul calling at precisely 6:47 a.m., which, by Wolfe's standards, bordered on barbarism. I answered on the second ring, still half-dressed, scribbling with one hand and brushing my teeth with the other. I've got eyes on the cottage, Saul said. Nobody's entered or left since Monday evening. I've seen no lights, no movement. Curtains are drawn and the car's gone. You sure it's the right one? Her cousin's name was on the rental contract. That's how I tracked it. Elsbeth Foregrave isn't inside. I straightened, toothbrush forgotten. You're saying she left? At some point after Glanville dropped her off. My guess? Someone picked her up. Quietly. I could hear Saul's sigh over the line. Wolfe's not going to like this. He already doesn't, I said. Thanks, Saul. Sit tight. By the time I relayed the news to Wolfe over breakfast, scrambled eggs for me, beer and corned beef hash for him, he was glaring into the middle distance like it owed him an explanation. She's moving independently, he said, or she's moved by force. Number, there would have been signs. She's acting according to a plan, her own or someone else's. But if it's hers, it's a poor one. Because it keeps us out of the loop? Because it implies she believes she can outmaneuver people who write threats in cursive and leave jewelry like blood. I sipped my coffee and studied him. So what now? We move ahead. Glanville remains here. Saul watches the cottage, and you, Archie, are going to pay a visit to the law firm's senior partner. Cray or Vinton. Cray. Old enough to be cautious, but not so old that he's immune to pressure. What kind of pressure are we applying? Wolfe gave me a thin smile. Curiosity. Ask him about Trebick. Watch how hard he lies. That I could handle. By 10:15, I was sitting in a conference room with mahogany walls, a tray of filtered water, and one Charles D. Cray, gray-templed, tight-lipped, and more polished than a politician's denial. He smiled the way sharks don't, and extended his hand like it was a legal form. Mr. Goodwin, I'm told you're investigating a personal matter involving one of our associates. That's right, I said. Elsbeth Foregrave. Regrettable. We hope she's well. Miss Foregrave was a valued member of the firm. You haven't seen her since Monday? No. And you're aware she expressed concern for her safety shortly before disappearing? A beat. That was not communicated to us. Interesting. She also mentioned pulling the wrong file, possibly one connected to a former client, Raymond Trebick. There it was. The blink. Subtle. Not even a flinch, but the kind of blink that says, I just stepped on something sharp. Mr. Trebick is no longer associated with this firm, Cray said smoothly. Any such document would have been archived or purged. Miss Foregrave would have had no reason to access it. Yet she did. And then she vanished. He tilted his head. Are you implying wrongdoing? I'm implying motive. She saw something, and someone doesn't want her talking. Cray folded his hands. This is an old firm, Mr. Goodwin. Our reputation is built on discretion. Miss Foregrave's absence is unfortunate, but we are not involved in her personal affairs. You sure about that? I am. Then you won't mind if we make that known publicly, just to assure folks the firm has nothing to hide. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Be careful, Cray said finally. What stones you turn over, Mr. Goodwin. Sometimes they roll back. I stood. We're pretty sturdy, but thanks for the warning. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was buried in a cross-reference of Trebick's former companies. The man had more shells than an Atlantic beach, half a dozen LLCs, each with paper trails that ended in legal fog. He's not clever, Wolfe said. He's insulated. I dropped into the red chair. Cray flinched when I mentioned him. As expected. He also warned me off. Wolfe snorted. Good. That means they know we're close. Close to what? Not what. Whom? He slid a folder across the desk. Trebick has a sister. Lives in Queens. Judith Marsh. Estranged, but listed as co-owner on one of the Shell properties. Which one? Gaunt Holdings, the one Elsbeth apparently stumbled onto. I opened the folder. Want me to pay her a visit? Number I want you to listen first. He pushed a phone toward me. On the screen was a voicemail transcript from Fritz's phone line, rarely used unless Wolfe specifically wanted to filter incoming calls. The message read, she said it wasn't just a name. It was a date. November 8th. The file had a date. She's gone now. Please stop looking. No name, sir, no number. Just the hollow scrape of a recorded whisper. Who left this? I don't know, Wolfe said, but they know the date. November 8th, that's 3 days from now. He nodded. Which means something is planned. A meeting, a transaction, possibly something Trebick wants buried permanently. So we're on a clock. Number Elsbeth is. That afternoon I made my way to Queens. Judith Marsh lived in a narrow duplex on a street where people minded their own business unless you parked in front of their hydrant. She answered the door in slippers and a cardigan, eyes sharp behind drugstore glasses. I don't talk to my brother, she said flatly. I don't want to talk to your brother, I said. I want to talk about Elsbeth Foregrave. That stopped her cold. She let me in. The apartment smelled like tea and old paper. A chessboard was set up by the window. She gestured to a chair and sat across from me, hands folded. She came here, Judith said quietly. Sunday. Said she didn't know who to trust. What did she want? Information. She knew Trebick's name. Wanted to know about Gaunt Holdings. I told her it was a shell company my brother used to hide assets. Maybe worse. She said she found a document dated November 8th. A list of names. Political ones. Judges. Real estate firms. Why come to you? Because she found my name too. That made me pause. You're involved? Not voluntarily. My brother used me to hide things. I signed papers I didn't understand, but I've been watching him for years. Why? Because I know what he did in '94? She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The silence answered better than words. Where is she now? I asked. I don't know. She said she had one more place to go, someone she trusted. Did she leave anything behind? Judith nodded. She stood and pulled a small envelope from a drawer. Inside was a folded slip of paper and a locker key. She said if anything happened to her, this was to go to the man in the yellow silk robe. I raised an eyebrow. She meant Wolfe. I thanked Judith and left. The key had a number etched on it. 207. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out for Wolfe. She's moving 3 steps ahead, I said. But she left us a breadcrumb. Wolfe didn't smile, but he did reach for the globe bar and pour himself a half-inch of brandy. We retrieve the contents of that locker, he said. Tonight. And after that. Then, he said, we bring Trebeck to our door. He sipped once, eyes burning brighter than the liquor. She may think she's hiding from him, he said. But the truth is, she's luring him to us. The locker was in Midtown, tucked away in one of those self-service storage terminals built for paranoid travelers and people with secrets. The kind of place where nobody asks why you're storing a shoebox at midnight, as long as you don't block the security cameras and pay in advance. Locker 207 was near the back, slightly scuffed, with a dent like someone had tried to kick it open years ago and failed. I inserted the key Elsbeth had left with Judith and turned. Inside was a plain manila envelope, thick but carefully sealed, and nothing else. No warning, no trap, no theatrics. Just the sort of thing Wolfe would call a proper invitation to war. I didn't open it until I was back in the car with the doors locked. The first thing I saw was a set of printed documents, photocopies, not originals, court filings, transaction ledgers, and 2 internal memos with letterhead from Cray, Vinton, and Glanville. One was dated October 29th, the other November 8th. Both mentioned Gaunt Holdings. Both included Raymond Trebeck's initials, and both included names. The names weren't just impressive, they were nuclear. 2 sitting judges, a deputy borough commissioner, and a senior partner at the law firm, underlined twice. It wasn't just a laundering scheme, it was political chess. Wolfe didn't say anything when I laid the papers out on his desk. He just read them once, slowly, and then again. When he finally leaned back, the expression on his face wasn't smug. It was quiet, cold approval. She's not just clever, he said. She's precise. She must have made these copies before she left, and planted them with an unlikely ally. Judith Marsh, I said, the estranged sister, which makes her involvement, willing or otherwise, our hinge. Trebeck knows she spoke to Elsbeth, which means we must now assume Trebeck believes Elsbeth gave her something. He left the necklace to rattle Glanville, and a voicemail to rattle us, all while he attempts to flush her into the open. I tapped the memo. So what do we do with this? Nothing. Yet. That surprised me. You don't want to turn it over? Not until we know what happens on November 8th. That's 3 days from now. Precisely why we can afford patience. Any earlier, and we lose control of the narrative. You think Trebeck's planning something specific? I think he's hosting something. A meeting, a transaction, a payoff. Possibly all 3. And if we let it happen, then we learn who he fears and who he trusts. Wolfe stood, which meant the day had shifted gears entirely. He crossed to the bookshelves and pulled down a slim black binder marked Miscellaneous. Retainers. Confidential. I want a tale on Cray, day and night, and I want to know who he dines with. I want Saul on Trebeck. No approach, no contact. Just record every footstep. I was already taking notes. And Elsbeth, he paused. You will find her before Trebeck does. That sounded easy, if you ignored the part where she deliberately vanished. I made calls through the night, ran her cousin's name through every short-term rental agency in upstate New York. Checked hospital intakes, alias usage, even burner phone purchases. Nothing turned up. By dawn, I had a headache, and Wolfe had consumed 3 bottles of brown beer and dictated 2 letters, one to an assistant district attorney he liked, the other to a librarian in Oslo, about a 16th century recipe for gooseberry reduction, both equally urgent in his mind. At 8:03 a.m., the doorbell rang. I answered with my shirt untucked and my hair making a statement of rebellion. The man on the stoop was unexpected, balding, middle-aged, and terrified. He wore a trench coat that didn't quite fit and clutched a briefcase like it might explode if he loosened his grip. "I'm Gregory Vinton," he said. I blinked. As in Cray, Vinton and Glanville. He nodded once, sweating. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe." "Immediately." I let him in. Wolfe didn't offer him a seat. Vinton remained standing, shifting from foot to foot like a man about to confess to something without understanding why he waited this long. "I think I'm being followed," he said, "and someone was in my office last night." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You only think?" My drawer was unlocked. Files were touched. My schedule was rearranged. And I think Elsbeth's disappearance is connected to Trebeck. I think she knew something. I think... He stopped, swallowing hard. "I think she tried to warn me." "You're mistaken," Wolfe said. "She didn't warn you. She bypassed you. You were compromised." Vinton flinched as if the word stung. "She left you out," Wolfe went on, "because she knew Cray wouldn't protect her, and she suspected you might not either." Vinton opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing to say. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear it." Wolfe gestured toward the desk. "Sit and listen carefully." For the next 15 minutes, Wolfe laid out the contents of the locker file, name by name, transaction by transaction. Vinton paled with each passing line. When Wolfe finished, he sat motionless, like someone waiting to hear a verdict. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You will go to Cray this morning and do nothing. You will watch, you will listen. If he mentions November 8th or uses the phrase Land Title Trust, you will record the conversation. If he leaves the office, you will call us. And if he asks where I've been, tell him the truth," Wolfe said. "Tell him you visited your conscience." Vinton left, rattled but obedient. By noon, we had our pattern. Cray had lunch with Trebeck at the Union Club. Saul snapped a photo of them entering together, Trebeck wearing a new coat and Cray with a folded paper under one arm. By 2 o'clock, Saul confirmed the paper was a contract, unsigned. "They're waiting for someone," Saul said over the phone. "Someone who has leverage," Wolfe murmured. "Elsbeth." At 5 p.m., Wolfe stood again, twice in one day, a rare feat. He walked to the bay window and stared out through the blinds. "She will come back." "You sure?" I asked. "She's left too many threads. The glove, the envelope, the date. She's telling us she wants to be found." I crossed my arms. "So where does she go next?" Wolfe turned. "Back to where it started." "Grand Central." "No," he said. "Her apartment." I was halfway to the door before he finished the sentence. It was dark by the time I reached East 39th. I parked a block away and approached from the opposite side. Lights were off. The front door was locked. I used the fire escape and a credit card and entered through the kitchen like an amateur thief. Inside, the air was still. No sign of a break-in. No new dust. But something was different. The photo of her and Glanville on the mantel was gone. I turned slowly. Then I heard it. Movement in the bedroom. Light steps, careful ones. I didn't call out. I followed the sound, silently, my hand on the inside pocket. The door creaked open, and there she was. Elsbeth Foregrave, wearing the same navy coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp and unslept. She looked at me and exhaled. "I was waiting," she said. "For who?" I asked. "For you," she said. "And for Wolfe. Because now I'm ready." She reached into her coat and pulled out another envelope, fatter than the first. "The copies were only half the story," she said. "I have the rest." I took the envelope and met her eyes. "We're going to stop them," she said. And this time, I believed her. We didn't speak until we reached the brownstone. Elsbeth rode in the passenger seat, hunched into the collar of her coat, eyes darting across every sidewalk and rear-view reflection like she expected a tail at every turn. I didn't blame her. After what she'd uncovered, I'd have expected more than a tail. I'd have expected a muzzle. Inside, Fritz had already turned down the lights and adjusted the heat in the guest parlor. Wolfe had a fire going in the office, logs stacked with geometrical precision. When I led her in, he didn't rise, didn't greet her, didn't even nod. But he looked at her in a way that said, "You are exactly as I calculated. Now prove it." She didn't hesitate. She pulled the envelope from her coat and laid it on his desk like a hand in poker. No bluff, no drama, just the cards. Wolfe stared at it for 2 full seconds before speaking. "This contains what?" "Originals," she said, "and internal memos not meant for paper." Wolfe didn't move. "Why return now?" "Because I couldn't run anymore," she said, "and because I figured out what's happening on the 8th. He didn't prompt her. He just let the silence expand like a net. "They're transferring ownership," she said. "A building that was condemned 2 years ago under Trebek's shell company. But on Friday, November 8th, it's going to be signed over to a city-backed development fund, Nanda Sanya, the name of a non-profit." "That sounds legal," I said. "It is," she replied, "except the non-profit doesn't exist." That landed with the proper weight. Wolfe leaned back and laced his fingers over his chest. "So Cray and Trebek used the firm to obscure the origin of ownership. The non-profit signs for the property. The development fund buys it at value, and the profit disappears into fog." Elsbeth nodded. "Millions. And the people involved?" 3 city officials," she said. "1 state land broker, and Cray, masked through another holding company. All in the memo I gave you." Wolfe finally reached for the envelope and opened it. Inside were copies of emails, digital access records, building permits, and a single thumb drive in a clear case. He handed it to me. "Scan it, secure it, then duplicate it 3 times." I took it without a word. Elsbeth sat down slowly, like her body was only just realizing she could. "I never meant to find it," she said. "I was looking for a budget file. Wrong printer tray, wrong initials. But once I saw it, once I saw what they were doing, I couldn't let it go." "Why not go to the police?" I asked. She looked at me with something close to pity. "Because the name I saw at the bottom of the authorization was someone I knew, a woman I trusted. The city controller's office." Wolfe made a low, dissatisfied sound. "It's not just a scheme, it's a chain. I didn't know who to trust. So I ran. Then I realized running wouldn't stop it." "No," Wolfe said, "but exposure might." We spent the next 2 hours cataloging every item in the folder. Elsbeth remembered details Wolfe didn't have to prompt. Where she found each file, how she copied it, how she mailed it to herself, and which files she didn't send because they might have triggered flags. She hadn't just run. She'd thought ahead. When Fritz brought in coffee, Wolfe took his first sip and made his declaration. "We host them here." I blinked. "We what?" Cray, Trebeck, Vinton, and the deputy land officer. We bring them here. We create a form. That sounds like a suicide pact with catered sandwiches. Wolfe turned his gaze to Elsbeth. They will not act unless cornered. But they will come if they believe it is a formality, if they believe the evidence is being bargained rather than detonated. Elsbeth's jaw tightened. You want me in the room with them? No, Wolfe said. I want you close, observing, hidden. You think they'll confess? I think, Wolfe said, they will reveal what they believe we already know. I leaned forward. And what if they don't? Wolfe's smile was thin. Then we make sure the proper ears are listening. The next day was a dance of bait and invitation. I delivered sealed notes to Cray's office, Trebeck's suite, and the public liaison for the land officer. All handwritten, all signed with Wolfe's heavy black ink. The message was short. A conversation is preferable to an inquest. You may confirm your attendance through silence. Thursday, 6 p.m. The brownstone. 3 hours later, Saul confirmed a flurry of behind-closed-door phone calls. No one declined. Elsbeth didn't speak much that day. She sat in the dining room with Fritz, helping slice pears and crust small tarts. I passed by once and heard her laugh. Soft, real. It reminded me she wasn't just a name on a case file. She was a woman who'd traded peace of mind for truth, and now truth was coming to her doorstep like a train without brakes. The morning of November 8th arrived gray and breathless. Wolfe read the Times with surgical precision, then dictated a list of arrangements to me. Chairs were positioned in the office, not in a circle, but not confrontational. The kind of layout that looked casual to the untrained eye and like psychological fencing to Wolfe. At 5:58, the doorbell rang. I opened it to Charles Cray. He was alone, gloved, and carrying a briefcase. His smile was pleasant. His eyes were exhausted. Behind him, 2 cars idled on the curb. One black, one gray. The men inside didn't get out. Mr. Wolfe, Cray said with a faint nod as he entered. Mr. Cray, Wolfe replied. Do sit. At 6:01, Trebeck arrived. He didn't smile. He walked in with his coat open and a steel tension around his eyes that hadn't been there in the Union Club photos. He saw Cray already seated and gave a humorless chuckle. We're doing it here, then. At 6:07, Gregory Vinton entered. He looked like a man waiting for a bolt of lightning to end the suspense. Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said simply, You know why you're here? Trebeck's mouth twitched. You think you have something. Wolfe nodded. I have her story, I have the documents, and I have your signatures. Direct and indirect. Cray exhaled through his nose. What do you want? Nothing, Wolfe said. I want to watch what you do when the illusion of safety is removed. Vinton looked down. Cray tapped his briefcase, and Trebeck leaned forward. You think this will hold? You think whatever you've gathered is enough to touch us? I think, Wolfe replied, it is enough to make you choose between exposure and containment, and I think you'll choose containment. Trebeck opened his mouth again. But from the far room, unseen but not unheard, Elsbeth spoke for the first time. No one's choosing anything, not this time. They all turned. She stepped into view, and everything stopped. Trebeck didn't rise. He didn't flinch either. But the skin at the corner of his jaw tightened, and his eyes darted once, to Cray, then back to Elsbeth, like a man recalculating a chessboard that just grew a third dimension. Cray cleared his throat. This is irregular. Elsbeth stepped further into the room. She wasn't trembling. Her posture was upright, her tone cool. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, and the same navy coat, now folded neatly over her arm. What's irregular, she said, is threatening someone to keep them silent, then trying to erase the threat when it no longer serves you. Wolfe To his credit, didn't so much as glance at her. He remained perfectly still, watching the reactions across the room like a botanist waiting for a rare bloom. Cray opened his mouth again, but Trebeck was faster. "You have no idea what you're stepping into," he said. "This isn't about one document. It's not even about a building. You think if you drag us into the light, you'll stop something, but you won't. You'll just change the angle of the shadow." Elsbeth tilted her head. "Then let's see what shape it takes." Vinton made a small, involuntary sound, half cough, half regret. "There's no fixing this now." "No," Wolfe agreed, "only accounting for it." He tapped one finger against the arm of his chair. "You have all made choices. Some shrewd, some short-sighted, some built on fear, but at no point, until now, did any of you expect to be confronted by the one variable you couldn't predict." His gaze turned toward Elsbeth. "Integrity." Trebeck scoffed, but Cray spoke before he could. "We could resolve this. Quietly. Offer her protection. Compensation." Wolfe cut him off with a small, sharp gesture. "You mistake the situation. Miss Forgrave is not here to negotiate." "No," Elsbeth said. "I'm here to confess. Not my guilt. Yours. Not because I want to destroy anyone, but because I'm tired of being afraid of men who believe being caught is impossible." She turned to Trebeck. "I saw the file. The land trust isn't just a laundering scheme. It's a cover. The same cover you used in '94, in '99, and in 2007. You just changed the names." He stood slowly. "You can't prove that." Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. "She doesn't have to. You already did." From the side table, I stepped forward and placed a small recorder on the desk. I clicked it on. The room filled with silence. Then Wolfe spoke. "Mr. Trebeck, would you repeat your claim that exposing this operation would not stop it, only change the shape of its shadow?" Trebeck's nostrils flared. He said nothing. Cray leaned forward, barely above a whisper. "You've made copies." Wolfe didn't dignify that with a reply. "I already had them, stored in 3 safe places, one of which wasn't even in the state." "You're bluffing," Trebeck said, voice low. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But the question is whether you believe it enough to sit still for what comes next." He gestured toward the hallway. "Mr. Goodwin, if you will." I stepped into the foyer, opened the front door, and nodded. 2 men entered. One carried a state badge. The other was federal. Both wore the kind of expression that said their pens were full and their time was short. Behind them came Saul, as calm as sunrise, holding a folder thicker than the Manhattan Yellow Pages. Cray stood. "You said this was a conversation." Wolfe nodded. "And it was. Until you started lying." The agents didn't speak to Wolfe. They didn't need to. One turned to Elsbeth. "You're ready?" he asked. She nodded once. "Then let's begin." Cray said something under his breath. Trebeck moved toward the door, until Saul stepped in front of him. "I wouldn't," he said. I watched Trebeck's eyes flicker, calculating, desperate. But the look faded when he saw Elsbeth watching him, not with fear, with certainty. They went quietly. No cuffs, no scenes, just the slow, surreal exit of 3 men who had played the game for decades and finally rolled the wrong number. When the door shut behind them, Wolfe didn't move. Elsbeth sat slowly on the edge of the red chair. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking, but she was still, and stillness has its own kind of noise. Fritz brought in tea, placed it without comment, and disappeared. "You could have disappeared," Wolfe said after a moment. "Stayed hidden, waited it out." "I tried," she said. "It didn't help." "No," Wolfe agreed. "It rarely does." He reached for his beer and took a sip. "Now what?" she asked. "That depends," Wolfe said. "What do you want?" Elsbeth stared into the fire. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to sleep without dreaming about printers and envelopes. Wolfe nodded once. Then you've already won. I leaned against the door frame. And the firm. Wolfe looked at me. It will be gutted, but law firms are like ivy. Chop one branch, and two grow in its place. Cheerful. It is not my business to uproot corruption, merely to illuminate it when it offends my sense of order. Elsbeth turned to me. Thank you for not giving up. I shrugged. I've got a stubborn boss. Wolfe grunted. Later, after Elsbeth had gone to rest and Fritz had excused himself, Wolfe and I remained in the office. The fire had burned low. The documents were back in their folder, untouched since the handoff. Outside, the city carried on, blissfully unaware of the storm that had passed over its rooftops. She's safe now? I asked. No one is ever fully safe, Wolfe said. But she is at last seen. He drained his beer, set it down, and closed his eyes. I presume dinner is on schedule. Roast pheasant, I said. Fritz went traditional. A pause. She will be fine, he said again, quieter now. And for Wolfe, that was the highest blessing he had to give. I turned out the light, the fire glowing in embers behind us. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, the brownstone was still. The next morning broke slow and grey, the kind of sky that held its breath and made the city sound quieter than it really was. Wolfe didn't emerge until nearly 10, which, for him, meant either supreme satisfaction or internal irritation. I knew better than to guess without evidence, so I waited until his second beer had been poured before opening my mouth. Elsbeth's staying with her aunt in Brooklyn, I said. Fritz packed her a care basket. Tea, hard biscuits, 2 pots of quince jam. Wolfe grunted, which was close enough to approval to count. She said she's going to look into civil work, pro bono housing advocacy. She's trading one headache for another, Wolfe said, folding open the Times. Maybe, but it's the kind of headache she can live with. He didn't reply, but I caught the flick of his eyebrow over the edge of the paper. Behind all that routine was a mind still tracing lines through the case, not because it hadn't been resolved, but because it had finished too cleanly. I pulled a chair close to the desk and reached for the notebook I hadn't opened since the night of the confrontation. There's one thing still bothering me. Only one? Wolfe asked. Cray. Vinton cracked. Trebeck collapsed like a souffle, but Cray stayed quiet, almost cooperative, like he expected the whole thing. Wolfe lowered the paper. Yes. You think he wanted it to end? I think, Wolfe said slowly, he chose the least humiliating way out. He let Trebeck play the villain while arranging his own exit behind the curtain. I frowned. That mean we missed something? It means, Wolfe said. He likely struck a deal before he ever stepped into this house. I leaned back, tapping my pen on the cover. So we may have put out the fire, but the kindling's still dry. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He closed the paper, folded it with mathematical precision, and laid it aside. We were never going to burn the whole forest, Archie. That was never the goal. Then what was? To show the trees that someone is watching. We didn't say much after that. Fritz arrived to announce that a visitor was at the door. No appointment, no name, just a woman asking to speak with Wolfe. Fritz's voice held a note of caution I hadn't heard in weeks. That always meant something. I rose, but Wolfe didn't move. You may bring her in, he said, but do so slowly. When I opened the door, the woman standing there wore a black coat and a plain scarf. Her eyes were sharp, her face pale, but she didn't look nervous. She looked resolved. Her gloved hand held a slim leather portfolio. I'm Judith Marsh, she said. I stepped aside without a word. Wolfe watched her enter as if she were carrying a snake under her arm. She stopped precisely 2 feet from the edge of the Persian rug and offered a small nod. "I'm not here to revisit old matters," she said, "only to deliver something I withheld." Wolfe lifted his hand but didn't speak. She opened the portfolio and removed a single photograph. It was black and white, faintly curled, dated years earlier. 3 men in suits stood in front of a chain-link fence. One of them was unmistakably Trebeck. Another was Charles Cray, years younger but unmistakable. The third man was someone I didn't know. "His name was Calvin Merrin," Judith said. "City inspector. He died in a car crash in 1994. No investigation, no funeral coverage, just disappeared." "Why bring this now?" Wolfe asked. "Because Elsbeth wasn't the first one to dig into Trebeck's schemes. Merrin was, and my brother had a hand in silencing him. The photo was taken 2 days before the crash. Cray kept it out of circulation. I took it from his file cabinet the day I walked out of his house for good. I took the photograph from her. The image was faint, but the tension was loud. Trebeck had his hand on Merrin's shoulder. Merrin wasn't smiling. Wolfe's voice was very quiet. "Why hold it all these years?" "I was afraid," Judith said, "and ashamed." Wolfe inclined his head. "You are neither now." She gave a brittle smile. "Fear can sour, but shame matures." He nodded once, and she turned to go. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe let out a long, deliberate breath. "You think Elsbeth needs to see this?" I asked. "No," he said. "She needs to forget it. But we won't." "No," he agreed. Later that day, the press began its slow unraveling. Local outlets first, a few terse releases about an internal review at Cray, Vinton, and Glanville. Then came the broader fallout, news of a land fraud investigation, a suspension of city development funding, and a whisper that 3 judges had quietly recused themselves from upcoming cases with no stated reason. Elsbeth called once. I answered. She didn't say much, just that she was safe, that her aunt's garden had started to bloom again, that she'd bought a new pair of gloves. "I kept the old one," she said. "The one I dropped." "I figured you did." She hesitated. "Tell Wolfe thank you." "I'll try," I said, "but he might take it as an insult." She laughed just once and hung up. That night, as we sat in the office, the city finally exhaled a little. Rain tapped at the windows, soft and even. Wolfe was in his chair. I was on the couch, watching the flames curl inside the hearth. "You know," I said, "you never told me what made you take the case in the first place." Wolfe didn't look up. "You don't usually take lost gloves." "I took it," he said, "because you brought it home." "That's it?" He glanced at me. "That's everything." We didn't say more after that. Some cases end with handcuffs, some with headlines. This one ended with a woman walking through Grand Central Station, dropping a glove not to be found, but to be followed. A signal, and like all good signals, it had been answered. The following morning arrived in pieces, light through the curtains. The sound of rain just sharp enough to suggest sleet, and Wolfe's voice from the next room, calm and clipped, dictating a letter to his orchid supplier about the inconsistency of their shipment dates. Everything felt oddly normal, which in Wolfe's world was the clearest sign that something had shifted for good. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee and the last third of the crossword when Fritz entered the office and set down the morning mail. Wolfe didn't glance at it right away. He rarely did. But when I noticed the slim envelope bearing no return address and addressed only to Mr. Wolfe in fine italic hand, I gave it a little tap with my index finger. "Another fan letter?" I asked. Wolfe grunted, but reached for it. He slit it open with the blade from his desk drawer and read it silently. His expression didn't change. Wolfe's face only knew 3 settings: displeasure, deep calculation, and mild annoyance. But the slight furrow of his brow told me this wasn't a thank you note from a grateful citizen. He passed it to me without comment. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. What you've done has been noticed. That was only one route. The tree still stands. Ask your assistant about Cressida Vale. You'll find the next glove soon enough. I read it twice before responding. Do we know a Cressida Vale? No, Wolfe said, but we will. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, hands clasped. Whoever sent this believes themselves part of a larger structure, or wants us to believe that. A warning? Wolfe frowned. Not exactly. An invitation, or perhaps a dare. I sat back down. So the glove wasn't just a message. It was an opening gambit. Precisely. We were quiet for a moment. Then Wolfe reached for his phone. Saul, he said when the line picked up. I require a background file on a Cressida Vale. No delay. Begin with court records, land acquisitions, and lobbying disclosures. Then move inward. He hung up without waiting for questions. I turned the note over in my hands. The next glove. You think it'll be literal again? I think, Wolfe said, we've been invited into something more expansive than we understood. Trebeck was not the whole. He was a symptom. Then who's the disease? That, Wolfe said, is what we now aim to diagnose. We didn't wait long. By noon, Saul called back with results, his voice terse and direct. Cressida Vale is a real estate consultant. She runs a boutique firm called Third Path Strategies, formerly operated out of Boston, relocated to Manhattan 2 years ago. She's not listed on any contracts directly, but she's the name behind 3 acquisitions tied to government-backed projects, 2 in the Bronx, 1 in Queens. Anything dirty? Not provable. But the companies she links to, they're shells. Same pattern as Trebeck. Different fronts. More sophisticated. She connected to Cray? Number, but she's had lunch twice this year with one of Cray's former partners. And she's on the board of a development fund that filed a proposal 2 weeks ago. Guess the building. I didn't need to. The one Elsbeth uncovered? Exactly. I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe had been listening. She was on the board. Yes. Which means she knew. And likely still knows, I said. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. Cressida Vale is the next node, but not the top. You think she sent the note? Number she wouldn't need to. Someone else is watching the game. Friend or foe? That depends on whether they want the tree trimmed, he said, or burned. That afternoon, I made my way to Third Path Strategies. Sleek building, 7th floor, frosted glass, receptionist with a headset and a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I gave my name, said I was a private investigator, and asked if Cressida Vale had 10 minutes. She's in a meeting, the receptionist said. I'll wait. 15 minutes later, I was ushered in. Cressida Vale stood to greet me. Late 30s, early 40s, sharp features, green blouse, a gold ring on her left hand. Not a wedding band. Her handshake was dry and brief. I usually don't take walk-ins, she said, but your name piqued my interest. Glad to know I have fans. I didn't say that. I smiled. Then let's call it mutual curiosity. Her office was spotless. Clean desk, no framed photos. A single orchid in a ceramic pot, white petals, symmetrical. I took a mental note of that. You're involved in the recent land acquisition. 41 Mercer. That depends what you mean by involved. Board oversight, documentation routing, legal structuring. I review opportunities. I don't write the checks. But you know where they lead. She didn't smile exactly, but her voice grew warmer, as if we'd just slipped into a chess match. Are you here to accuse me of something, Mr. Goodwin? I'm here to ask what happens after the glove is dropped. That got her attention. Her eyes flicked once, briefly toward her desk drawer, then back to me. I see. So you do know Trebeck? I know of him. I know he was careless. And Cray? More careful, less ambitious. I leaned forward. And you? I prefer patterns to chaos. Then explain this one. I laid the note on the desk. She didn't touch it. That wasn't from me, she said. Number, but it came from someone in your orbit. Possibly. You want us involved. I want someone involved, she said. You were effective. And why stir this up? She didn't blink. Because this isn't a matter of justice anymore. It's a matter of inevitability. This city is built on forgotten stories. If you dig deep enough, all you find is rot. Then why not walk away? Because some of us are tired of holding up the roof just to keep the termites from getting crushed. She reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a small silver key, and slid it across the desk. A warehouse in Long Island City, she said. Unit B12. The rest of the story's there. I stared at it. What's the catch? No catch, she said. Only weather. It's been raining a long time, Mr. Goodwin, and people are starting to notice the leaks. That night I laid the key on Wolfe's desk. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at it like it was a code wrapped in metal. Tomorrow, he said. You'll go. You think it's real? I think, he said. We found the next glove. He looked up at me then, but not the last. The next morning was brisk and unceremonious, with just enough late autumn bite in the air to make the trip out to Long Island City feel more like an assignment than an adventure. The warehouse was exactly what you'd expect. Gravel lot, rusted roll-up doors, and rows of low units that all smelled faintly of dust, diesel, and forgotten hopes. Unit B12 didn't advertise its secrets, but when I slid the key Cressida Vale had given me into the lock and eased the door up, I saw that someone had taken considerable care in arranging what lay inside. No chaos, no boxes stacked to the ceiling, just one long table in the center of the space, and on it 6 binders. Each was labeled by year: 1994, 1999, 2003, 2007, 2011, and 2018. The cover page of the first binder was enough. Property Conversion Index, internal draft. Not for circulation. The second page showed a spreadsheet with names. Inspectors, clerks, law partners, city agents. A different name highlighted in each binder. Like a relay team, each runner passing the scheme forward through time. And in every year, one common element. The same signature appeared at the bottom of each deal memo, sometimes abbreviated, sometimes full. Calle Valle. She hadn't just known the players. She had been one. It hit me like a cold breeze under the collar. The tidy office, the careful phrasing, the silver key. She wasn't throwing light on a crime. She was erasing herself from it. I made copies of everything, photos, notes, even the dust on the table in case Wolfe wanted it analyzed. Then I locked the unit, returned to the car, and drove back to the brownstone with a headache and a stomach full of facts that didn't sit right. Wolfe was waiting, of course. He hadn't moved from his chair, but Fritz had laid out lunch, and Saul had dropped off his latest surveillance memo. Cressida had left the city an hour earlier on a train bound for Montreal. I laid the copies on Wolfe's desk, waited while he scanned the first 20 pages, then took my seat and waited for judgment. She was the architect, he said after a moment. Not just a witness. No, Wolfe said. The designer, the draftsman, perhaps even the gardener. I watched his expression as he turned another page. She didn't want to be caught. No, he agreed. She wanted to be remembered differently. She played us. Wolfe shook his head. She chose us. There is a difference. I frowned. You're not angry? I am, he said. But not at her. That silenced me. He reached for his beer, took a sip, and set it down with care. There comes a point in every web when the spider retreats, not because she fears the fly, but because she knows another spider is watching, She left us the map. She left us the remains of the orchard, the fruits already plucked, the tree felled, and only the bark left to tell the story. I leaned back in my chair. So what do we do? What we were meant to do, we pass it on. He handed me the folder, closed and bound. Deliver it to the Attorney General's office. Directly. No note? No need. That afternoon I walked it over myself. No theatrics, no declarations, just a sealed envelope and a quiet handoff. 3 days later, the first subpoenas were issued. They didn't include Cressida Vale. She was gone, cleanly, skillfully, like a shadow stepping into fog. Elsbeth called that evening. I gave her the shape of it, sparing the sharp edges. "You were right," she said. "There's always another glove." "Maybe," I said, "but not always someone willing to pick it up." She didn't answer, but I heard the quiet breath she took, the kind you only draw when you're far enough from the storm to believe you might stay dry. When I hung up, Wolfe was still in his chair, reading something French and outdated, probably about ducks. "Closure?" I asked. "An illusion," he said, "but one people sleep better with." "Perhaps," he said, "but I prefer equilibrium." Fritz brought dinner, pheasant again, with a chestnut glaze Wolfe would later declare insufficiently daring. I poured the wine. As we sat down, Wolfe offered a final thought, offhand but pointed. "She designed the system, Archie, but she also cracked it, not with remorse, with precision, a scalpel turned inward. You think she regrets it?" "Number I think she regrets being seen." I nodded. "And us?" Wolfe looked at me over his glass. We were the mirror. Dinner passed quietly after that. No toast, no grand pronouncements. Just the hum of a city exhaling outside our windows and the knowledge that the case was closed, but the world it revealed was not. I filed the notes the next day, labeled the box Vale, C, Manhattan sequence. Tucked it between Trebeck, R, and Krauss, E in the locked cabinet. Then I pulled the glove from the drawer, the original one, still smooth and clean. I left it on Wolfe's desk. When he saw it, he didn't say a word. Just nodded once, as if to say, there will be another.